in Ambassador John Bolton, former U.S. ambassador to the UN and a Fox News contributor. Good morning, Ambassador. What should the U.S. response be?
Well, I think our policy on North Korea has been wrong for a long time, so I'm not in favor of a small shift in policy. I think the only way to deal with North Korea's nuclear weapons program, and let's be clear, this missile launch is part of its nuclear weapons program. It's a delivery vehicle for the warhead when they're finally able to mate the nuclear device and the missile. What our policy should be is the reunification of the Korean Peninsula. The only way that we're going to solve the North Korean nuclear weapons problem is by ending North Korea. Now, that's an arduous task, I recognize that, but in the short term, we've used up the conventional devices. North Korea is the most heavily sanctioned country on Earth. It obviously didn't stop this missile launch. It hasn't stopped them from testing 2 nuclear devices. So I think that route's not going to produce anything. I think you have to take a longer view and a bigger picture.
So there aren't more sanctions that could be imposed on Pyongyang that would have any effect in your view?
Well, sure, you could impose more sanctions. Then you'd have to ask whether China, Russia, Iran, and others will bother to comply with the sanctions. And I think the evidence of this launch is that existing sanctions, and there have been several Security Council sanctions going back to 2006, the United States and some others have had near total sanctions on North Korea for close to 50 years, but they obviously have not worked, and more sanctions won't work either.
Well, this is what, the third time that the North Koreans have put together some highly provocative act, just really during the Obama administration. The message that the U.S. has to send out has to be clear, but what kind of stick do we have to go with our words?
Well, I think we've got to convince China, and I concede it's an arduous task, but I think we've got to convince China that their own security long-term depends on ending North Korea's nuclear weapons program. China could do that alone if it wanted to. It supplies 90% of North Korea's energy and substantial amounts of food to keep the North Korean population there instead of in China. But China's not been willing to do that because it fears that the regime would collapse and the peninsula would reunify. That's what we need to convince China long term it is in their interest, because if North Korea's nuclear weapons program goes on, other countries in the region, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and others, are themselves going to look to whether they want nuclear weapons, which would obviously make the entire region much more unstable.
And for those who wondered whether Kim Jong-un had staying power as leader of North Korea, he just bought himself a whole lot of time in that job, didn't he?
Well, I think he showed that that the capability of the North Koreans has been underestimated, and I think you're right, this will be a political boost for him. But let's be clear, this rocket testing program and the work with Iran have been going on for decades, and they have had some notable failures, but each failure tells them something, and each success tells them something. If they can put a payload into orbit, which we concede they've apparently done, in effect, they're well on the way to putting a nuclear payload anywhere on the planet.
2 members of the original Axis of Evil still working together. Ambassador John Bolton, thank you.